A guy in Ohio was clearing out his late uncle's garage last summer, tossing water-stained boxes into a dumpster without opening most of them. One box felt heavier than the rest, so he cracked it open before it went in the trash. Inside, sandwiched between old car magazines and a stack of TV guides, was a comic book with a cover so faded he almost couldn't read the title. He nearly threw it out anyway. Instead, he took a photo, posted it online, and asked if it was worth anything. 6 weeks later, that single comic sold at auction for just under $48,000. There are 10 comic books sitting in garages, attics, and basements across the country right now that collectors are actively hunting in 2026, and most of them look exactly like the kind of thing you'd hand off to a kid to color in or toss in a recycling bin. Water damage, missing covers, spines so cracked they look like they'll fall apart if you breathe on them wrong. One of the books on this list has sold for more than most people's houses. Another one is so easy to overlook that people have genuinely given away 5- and 6-figure comics for a couple bucks at a garage sale without knowing what they were holding. Before you recycle a stack of old comics, before you let your dad's or your grandfather's collection go to a stranger for pennies, watch this whole video. I'll walk you through exactly what to look for, and by the end, you'll know whether that box in your garage is worth a second look or genuinely worth nothing at all. Here's why this matters more right now than it did even 5 years ago. Comic collecting used to be a hobby built around specialty shops and small regional conventions, mostly guys who'd been reading these books since they were kids, trading with each other. That world still exists, but it's not the whole picture anymore. Grading services made it possible to put an exact number on a comic's condition, which turned collecting into something closer to an investment market. Auction houses started running dedicated comic sales with the same seriousness they give fine art. And streaming platforms and superhero movies introduced an entirely new generation of buyers with real money who have never set foot in a comic shop but desperately want to own a piece of the character's origin. At the same time, the generation that actually bought these books off the newsstand in the 1930s, 40s, 50s and 60s is passing them down to kids and grandkids who never read comics and have no idea what they're looking at. Rising demand and a flood of unidentified supply. That's exactly why life-changing comics are still turning up in attics for free, while the top examples sell for the price of a mansion. Keep two things in mind as we go through this list. First, condition is everything in this hobby, more than almost any other collectible category. Comics are graded on a scale from 0.5 up to a perfect 10, and the gap in value between a mid-grade copy and a high-grade copy of the same book isn't small. It's often 10 times the price or more. A comic with a piece missing from the cover, water staining, or tape repairs can be worth a small fraction of a clean copy, sometimes less than 5%. Second, and this is the mistake that costs people the most money, never assume a comic's value based on how old or beat up it looks. A comic that's falling apart at the spine can still be a landmark first appearance worth a fortune, while a comic that looks bright and clean might be a common reprint or a later issue nobody wants. The details that separate a treasure from a stack of paper are printed right on the cover and inside the book, and they're easy to miss if you don't know exactly where to look. Let's start at number 10. Most people have never heard the name Whiz Comics, and that's exactly the problem. This is technically the first issue of the series, even though the cover says number 2, because the publisher, Fawcett, had already used the number 1 for a promotional giveaway edition that barely circulated. Whiz Comics number 2 is the true first appearance of Captain Marvel, a character who at one point outsold Superman on the newsstand, and was popular enough that National Comics, the publisher of Superman, sued Fawcett over it. Here's what people miss. This book is from 1940, and it doesn't look flashy. The cover art is a little rough by modern standards, faded reds and blues, a costumed figure lifting a car over his head. Someone flipping through an old box of comics sees a character they don't recognize, from an era they don't understand, and assumes it's some forgotten, worthless title. It gets tossed in the giveaway pile at estate sales more often than you'd think, because unlike Superman or Batman, most casual buyers today have no reference point for who this character even is. Check the indicia, the small block of text on the inside front cover or first page listing the publisher and date. If it says Fawcett Publications and a 1940 date, and the cover reads Whiz Comics No. 2, you may be holding one of the most significant Golden Age comics in existence. Even in low, well-worn condition, with the cover detached or heavy paper loss, copies have sold in the tens of thousands of dollars. A high-grade copy with strong color and a complete cover has sold for over $3 million at auction, making it one of the single most valuable comic books ever sold. The trap people fall into with a book this old is trying to clean it up, wiping down a fragile Golden Age cover, taping a tear to hold it together, or pressing it flat under books to remove creases, all count as amateur restoration to a grading service, and undisclosed restoration can tank the value by more than half. If you find something that looks like this, the safest move is to do absolutely nothing to it and get it in front of someone who knows what they're looking at. Everyone recognizes Batman. Almost nobody realizes just how brutal the value gap is between a common Batman comic and this specific one. Detective Comics No. 27 from 1939 is the character's first appearance, and it's one of the most recognizable comic book covers ever printed, a caped figure swinging a criminal by a rope against a purple night sky. This is the book that started an entire publishing company, and it's easy to miss for a reason that has nothing to do with condition. The cover doesn't say Marvel anywhere near the top. It's titled Marvel Comics, published in 1939 by Timely Publications, the company that would eventually rename itself Marvel decades later. It features the first appearance of the original android Human Torch and the first appearance of Namor, the Submariner, two characters that predate almost every name people associate with the Marvel brand today. People scanning an old box for valuable comics are usually looking for names they recognize on the cover: Spider-Man, X-Men, Avengers. A comic from 1939 with unfamiliar character names and Timely Publications printed in small type on the inside gets passed over constantly, especially since the cover art, a flaming figure bursting through a metal cylinder, doesn't look like anything associated with the Marvel Cinematic Universe most casual sellers have in their head. Check the indicia for Timely Publications and a 1939 date, and look at the cover for the burning humanoid figure breaking free of a robotic shell. That combination is the entire tell. Condition census on this book is extremely thin. Fewer than a couple hundred copies are known to survive in any graded condition, and low-grade, well-worn copies with significant paper loss have still sold for well over $100,000. A high-grade copy sold at auction for over $1 million, making it one of the small handful of Golden Age comics to break that threshold. One thing worth knowing specifically about this book: because it's so valuable even in rough shape, it's also one of the most commonly reproduced and faked comics in the hobby. Reprints exist, and some unscrupulous sellers have tried passing off later reproductions or facsimile editions as originals. If you think you've found a real copy, the paper stock, the exact indicia wording, and the specific printing details matter enormously, which is exactly why this is not a book to try to authenticate yourself from a phone screen. If there's one comic book that even non-collectors have heard of, it's this one. Superman's first appearance from 1938, the book most people picture when they imagine a comic book worth a fortune. Because it's so famous, you'd think nobody could possibly overlook a real copy. You'd be wrong, and the reason is almost the opposite of every other entry on this list so far. People assume it's impossible for a real one to still be out there in a random garage, so they don't even consider the possibility seriously. Family members find an old, crumbling comic with a red-caped figure lifting a car over his head, recognize it as Superman-related, and assume it must be some later common issue, because surely a real Action Comics number 1 wouldn't be sitting in a shoebox in a basement in 2026. That assumption is exactly how copies keep surfacing. One was found folded up inside a wall during a home renovation. Another turned up in a box of donated items at a thrift store. Look at the cover specifically. The car lifting image is unique to this exact issue. It was never repeated on a cover in that specific pose. Check for the number 1 and a June 1938 date in the indicia, published by Detective Comics Incorporated. If it matches, you are looking at what is widely considered the most valuable comic book in the world. Low-grade, heavily worn copies missing large chunks of the cover have still sold for six figures. A single high-grade copy sold privately for $6 million, and another copy sold at public auction for over $3.5 million. The mistake that costs people the most with this specific book is speed. Because everyone knows the name, sellers sometimes rush to list it online themselves, snap a bad photo, and accept the first offer from someone who clearly knows more than they do. If you genuinely believe you have one, slow down. Don't clean it, don't try to flatten it, and get it authenticated by a legitimate grading service before you let it out of your hands. This is a strange one to explain, because the cover doesn't even hint at what's actually significant inside. All-Star Comics number 8 from 1941 features an ensemble team cover with a handful of Golden Age heroes, nothing that immediately screams landmark issue. The real reason this book matters is buried in the back pages, a story that introduces Wonder Woman for the very first time, months before she got her own solo title. This creates a specific trap. People who do recognize old comics as potentially valuable often judge a book entirely by its cover art, and this cover simply doesn't advertise its own importance. It looks like any other ensemble superhero team-up from the era. Unless you know to flip past the cover story and check the back of the book, it's easy to file this one under ordinary and move on. The tell here is the indicia and issue number, combined with actually knowing what's inside, since the cover art alone won't tell you. Confirm it's All-Star Comics, Issue 8, published by All American Publications in 1941. Condition-dependent, well-worn copies with significant wear have sold in the tens of thousands of dollars, and high-grade examples have crossed well past $300,000 at auction, with the finest known copies pushing toward $500,000. Wonder Woman's enduring popularity has only pushed demand for this specific issue higher every year, especially as the character's mainstream visibility has grown through film and television. If you find a box of Golden Age team-up comics and don't recognize most of the character names on the covers, don't just check the front. The story that makes a book valuable isn't always the one being advertised. Here's a case where the title on the cover is almost designed to make people underestimate it. Amazing Fantasy was originally a science fiction and fantasy anthology series with mediocre sales, and Marvel was reportedly planning to cancel it entirely. Issue 15, published in 1962, was meant to be the final issue, and somebody decided to use it to test out a new character concept before pulling the plug. That character was Spider-Man. Because the title reads Amazing Fantasy and not Amazing Spider-Man, people scanning a collection for valuable Spider-Man comics often skip right past it, assuming it's an unrelated fantasy anthology title with no connection to the character at all. The cover does show Spider-Man holding a criminal while swinging past a window, so the artwork itself is the giveaway. But if you're moving fast through a stack of comics and only reading titles, this one hides in plain sight. Confirm the issue number is 15, and the cover shows a red and blue costumed figure with a spider emblem swinging with one arm while restraining a man with the other. The indicia should list Marvel Comics Group or Nonpareil Publishing Corp. with a 1962 date. This is one of the most consistently high-demand books in the entire hobby, because it's the origin of one of the most commercially successful characters ever created. Low-grade, well-read copies with significant wear and creasing have still sold for well over $100,000. High-grade copies have sold at auction for over $1 million, and a single exceptional copy sold privately for over $3 million. Because demand for this book is so intense, it's also heavily counterfeited and heavily restored. Trimmed edges, added color touch-up on the red costume elements, and re-glued spines are common on copies that circulate through casual resale channels. If you think you have a real one, treat it exactly like the Golden Age entries on this list. Don't touch it, don't clean it, get it professionally authenticated before doing anything else.